Hey everyone, Eggman here with another video, and today we're going to do a top 8 breakdown for the Cool Stuff Games case tournament that happened this past weekend. It was 118 players, which is super big for what this kind of tournament was, and just for a kind of an in-person Florida event for this, with 7 rounds of Swiss with a top 8 cut that we see here today. So real quick before we get started, first, if you guys appreciate these videos, please consider hitting this like and subscribe button. It's always a little bit tricky to get these deck lists. I've put the time into putting them to dev, and I'm also on the road, so I don't have as much time to kind of do this as usual. And then also huge thanks to Orange Samurai, who let me use these deck lists for as well. He did most of the collection of the deck list as well. He was at this event too, and he was able to capture footage of the matches as well. So make sure to check out the Facebook linked in the description, as well as this document that's also in the description if you guys want to see any of the games that happened there. So, but looking at this top 8, this is definitely a Luffy weekend between this event and the TCG Con event that I also covered today. There were 4 Luffys, and then there's 2 Eustass kids, 1 Doffy, and 1 Kaido as well. So pretty similar to the top 8 from over there. Luffy's seeing a big rise of popularity right now, which is really interesting. It's something that I'm really happy about. I'm a big believer in Luffy, and I think that's definitely been a shift in the last couple of weeks, so that's really cool. So it was a top 8 cut, but then it was a top 4 split as well. So we don't have a definitive first, second, third, fourth, but we do have the top 4 here as well. So anyways, let's get into some deck lists, starting off with Frank's top 4 Eustass kid. Starting off, we have Frank Krasnic's top 4 Eustass kid, and when I made my video going over Eustass kid for the TCG Con, pretty much said like there's 2 ways to build kid. There's either you play some event cards that you feel are worth it, or you just go full greed, no event cards, and just say, you know what, so many times I want to just use all my Dawn every turn, not have to use it on my opponent's turn, and that is kind of what the build that Frank went for this weekend. So it does have a lot more flexibility, and it does have a little bit less defensive prowess because of it, but you can kind of make it up in a couple ways. So some additional cards that we see here is one, because they don't run the event cards, they went 4 of the Trafalgar Law, which again, a lot of these like non-counter cards can be stuck in your hand, and the worst thing about all 4 of these, meaning that Trafalgar Law, the Basil Hawkins, the Captain Kid, both of them essentially, is that they can potentially just be stuck in your hand. They're all kind of cards that you want to play not as much reactively, but more of when you have the time to play it, right? A lot of your reactive cards like Cat Viper, Izo, etc., you want to play kind of immediately, and if you do that to try to get rid of one of your opponent's threats or something, it means that you don't have enough Dawn most of the time to play these bigger threats as well. So I think that is one of the reasons that you can kind of use this without the event cards, because those event cards, again, are a little bit reactive. It means that you can't use as much Dawn as you want to every turn, because, if you want to drop down an 8 or 7 drop kid, that's usually your entire turn, right? You want to be able to play these, and then you'd have to have Dawn open for your event cards, and because of that, it just makes it a little bit clunky with your Dawn management. So I think that playing no events is a good, valid strategy. I think I've seen a lot of lists that aren't running any events either, just because you want to be able to consistently use all your Dawn and then not have to keep some open, or just have a lot of cards kind of stuck in your hand because you decided to play like a 7-drop Eustass kid, and then you can't do everything else. So other than that, I think it's pretty standard. It's just kind of 2 different ways to think about it. Some just other choice cards. Yamato's not always needed, but it is a Wano country, so worst case it's just a +1k counter off the Momo. And Raizo at 3, Okiku at 4, pretty standard there, and then Basil Hawkins to like the top end ratio is kind of what you want, but usually it's around 6 to 8 cards of these non-counterable, and then the Trafalgar Law at 4. This is like the most I've seen Trafalgar Law in a minute, but it is strong at what it does, and being able to either reset cards or just get cards. If you played an Izo early to suspend something, you can bounce it back to your hand with Trafalgar Law, and then play like a Kiku or something that you want to. So all in all, that Eustass kid is strong, and congrats again to Frank there. Next up, we have Jimmy Watts and Ricky Calarco's top 4 Luffy. As far as I know, they're the exact same decks, and I'm also going to assume they work together to make these. I don't know the lore, but that's my assumption. But man, Luffy's been doing really, really good this weekend. Between the TCG Con and this event, it's gone 7 of the top 16 spots for this weekend. So really interesting to see that just kind of explode in popularity this weekend too, especially since Trafalgar Law, which has been doing previously the week beforehand, was not showing up, and I think Luffy has a good way to counter that, as well as Kaido hasn't been doing as well either, which I think Luffy can have a really good matchup against that too. But going into this deck specifically and looking at the ratios, it has pretty much the main cards that I've been seeing for the deck, and generally if I'm just going to compare it to the list that I've been running, the differences that I've been seeing is that it's been using a lot more of the event cards. I've been swayed that guess what. Gum Gum Red Hawk is just really good if it hits in your life. Sometimes it just prevents your opponent going off. Obviously, it's a really good effect for your opponents. Like if they're using like an Eustass Kids Try in the game, this is really good at just shutting that down in a lot of ways. And then also being able to just use as a counter, I think is great too. This deck is pretty flexible on your Dawn, so you're usually okay with leaving a couple Dawn open to do some reactive plays as well. And Gum Gum Red Hawk is just a really good removal tool against something like Trafalgar Law as well. Radical Beam, I don't like this as much. I don't think you need it as much for what you are. It is a really good counter. It just is a 4K counter for 1, so it is strong for what it is. But I don't find that you're needing to be defensive enough for this to be consistently valued, but I think it is a good card for what it is. 4 Shanks, which is a madman play. I always seeing this which is silly. Then Luffy and only Luffy at 2. I'd definitely put 2 more Luffys, and if it was a case where they didn't have enough of the Luffys between the 2 of them, and they did have enough Shanks because they bought enough boxes, maybe, but 4 Shanks I think is a little bit overkill, especially since you're playing the Ben Beckman, which has been a pretty common ad for Luffys as well. It's just a 7-drop that is really obnoxious to get rid of. The only way to really consistently get rid of it is like a Don Quixote Doflamingo, bouncing it back into your hand. But if you're playing against blue, you're probably just playing more of your rush guys out, because putting those cards back in your hand just means you get to play it again next turn and kind of use the effects. So last card I want to talk about is the promo Luffy. I honestly just don't have enough of these myself to actually consistently test with it, but I think it's a good card. It's a 2K counter, it's a straw hat, and also it's just can become like a 7K if you put 2 Dawn underneath it, which is really easy for this deck as well. So I think it's something that's worth trying out if you like it, but again, it's just a 2K worst case. So anyways, congrats to both players. I think Luffy is really good in this set and has been doing really well as well. So next up we do have Victor's top 8 Don Quixote Doflamingo. And we kind of see that this deck is a little bit restricted to the build, and I would say this is a deck that more benefits a good player than necessarily a good deck builder. There's not like a lot of space for this deck to make creative choices, in the fact that you have to choose a lot of 4 warlords, and there's honestly only so many good blue cards in the game right now. So going over the checks for this one, no Desert Spada, which I like running 1 or 2 just to like have a different way to look at the top cards in my deck and make sure they're rearranged. They also decided to run Kuma with the Pacifista. We saw on the TCG Con that the top list for that did run the Kuma, but no Pacifistas at all, which is really interesting. Bumping up to 3 copies of Virgo, which is the most I've ever seen in a deck like this, but I understand why the temptation is there. This can just be like your just best removal card, which is really kind of silly when you think about it, but just a very strong card there. And then 3 Don Quixote Doflamingos and 3 Draco Mihawks. So again, I mentioned in the other video, but I'll say it again here. The only thing I don't like about Doflamingo is that like a good player has to recognize when their next turn they're going to use your leader effect, or next turn they're going to drop a Draco Mihawk. You have to make sure that you can sequence the top cards of your deck with cards like Perona and the 3-drop blocker, but you have to make sure that when you do that, you take it into consideration that, oh, maybe I won't have the Dawn to do that. Maybe I need to do something more reactive, like play a Don Quixote Doflamingo or Draco Mihawk to get rid of something my opponent's going to play next turn, and I have to really think that out. So that's something that I think that this deck is a little bit more, it's obviously a lot of luck based on top 5 and stuff, but also you have to be very smart about what your next play is, and you have to really think ahead in this deck more than I think a different deck. So again, congrats to Victor on their top 8 finish there. And to wrap it on up, we do have Christian's top 8 Kaido. And real quick, I will mention that this specific list has 52 cards. These are the 52 that he ran for the event, which is illegal for the event, but I think this is more of just an honest mistake, and based on talking to to Orange Samurai and just his interactions. I think it was a mistake, and there weren't any deck checks for top 8 either, so that was just a slip up on this one. This was like a case tournament. This wasn't, obviously an official Bandai event, so a little bit more lean on that, but I think it was an honest mistake as well. So no, I don't want any like witch hunting or anything like that. It's just something that happened. So if he was to remove cards, he said that he'd remove the Jack as well as the Queen, the Rush Queen. So those, if he had to go 50, it'd be these. And I also will say, like, running 52 cards means that you are probably at a disadvantage at finding Onigashima and everything else. So even though the deck is illegal, I'd say it's more impressive that you're able to top with 52 cards versus 52 for Kaido specifically, but I digress. So going over this, we haven't been seeing Kaido do as well this weekend as it normally does. Normally gets like at least a solid 1 or 2 spots in the top 8, but this is the only list that has really topped between the two events we covered this weekend. And looking at this build as well, I really don't like this Black Maria. I'll say it's not as good as I think just the 2-drop is. It's essentially just as removable as the 2-drop in a lot of ways. The only way that I'd say that this is better if you're staring down a Nico Robin across the board, which does happen quite a bit, but normally you don't really have the Dawn to play the 4-drop, and if you're going to play the 4-drop Dawn, like you pretty much just play the Queen if you get it too. So I don't know. I want you guys to say your opinions on this card. I don't personally like it, but I understand like the value from it and the fact that it can become a 6K, which means that it is a little bit harder to remove, especially late game where Dawn minusing 1 isn't as impactful as you're going to go up to like 10 every turn anyways. So also the Mad Lad ran 4 of the 10-drop Kaidos, which is absurd, and then also 3 of the 9-drop Kaido. So really interesting kind of split there, and also just a lot of event cards. So normally you run 4 of the 6-drop King and like 2 or 3 of the 7-drops, but a 1-3 split here, and then running 2 Blast Breath, 4 Thunder Bagwas, 2 of the Elephant Smart Shoes, and then also 3 of the Bracho Bombers. All these are great for removal. This obviously hits more, so between the two of them, this hits something better, and it lets you ramp a Dawn, but at the cost of you don't have a 7K body, which is normally kind of like the best thing about King, is that you are able to keep it out and then get more removal as the game goes on. There's also Elephant Marchu, which I've been doing some experimenting with. Just being able to kill something that's 2K or sorry, a 2-drop or less is kind of important against a lot of these smaller to the ground matchups too. And I could even see this like on like the turn you kind of go for a game. Your opponent usually drops like a blocker too, so being able to drop this to drop a get rid of a blocker, and then being able to, use the Dawn and then go in for attack. And so I think it's impactful there as well. There's also, they are running the page 1s, which normally I see a lot of people drop out of the deck. This one being able to attack cards in active mode, I think is great for what it is. And then also 2 of the vanillas as well. I don't know how often you are playing ulti, but in the case that you are, being able to play 2 cards for 1 is quite a good effect. That it's weird too, it's purple, because purple is probably like one of the colors that benefits the least out of swarming the board, but having to do that is great. So I think that's kind of impactful. So anyways, that is the list. Congrats again to Christian for their top 8 finish, and that is going to be the breakdown for us today. So again, thank you very much to Orange Samurai for helping us get these lists and letting us make this video too. I really do appreciate it. Make sure to check out their Facebook, not only for the VODs, but also they have a lot of decks that they put on there too. So if you're interested in seeing what's topping around the world, it's a very good resource for that. But that's going to be it for us. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I'll catch you all next time.